Your story starts at birth, and you were born into war, and so I kind of want to cover some of that. But in 1973, Nixon signed a peace agreement with North Vietnam, South Vietnam, and the U.S., which unfortunately nobody followed. And then the U.S. started pulling troops out in 1973. You were born in 1974 in Saigon. The hospital was getting mortared.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to start right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's put us back in that time frame, huge unpopular American war. It was a war of a body count, the Americans that came in and fought against the communist regime, the North Vietnamese. Well, during that time when the Americans withdrew, I'm South Vietnamese. I was born on the losing side of the war. On the morning of my birth, my mother, I was born on the basement floor of the Saigon hospital. My mother shielded my body from incoming artillery fire on the morning of my birth. At 3 months old, I lost my freedoms to the communist regime. Like any occupying force, they're going to take the leadership out of that government. So Saigon was the capital of Vietnam, South Vietnam. The country was divided in north-south. The North Vietnamese surrounded the country, the city of Saigon, mortared us, artillery fire. Eventually, the troops came in, and that's when the post-war genocide started happening. Our family, the North Vietnamese will go through the homes. They'll look for valuables, good belongings. They'll push out the civilians out in the streets, and if you serve with the South Vietnamese army, then you are immediately executed. All right. If my uncle who served with the South Vietnamese along with the Americans, they were immediately executed. My other uncles were imprisoned in what they call re-education camps. Let me explain this, Shawn. These re-education camps are torture camps. By the time I received my uncle, after 15 years of imprisonment, he had no skin on the bottom of his foot.
Damn.
All right, so they tortured him, beat him, broke him as a human being. So at 3 months old, we endured that. My mother held on to me as they killed our family. We were facing genocide. We lived underneath communist occupation till I was 3 years old. During that time, there was a flux of refugees leaving Vietnam.
Was the violence happening the entire 3 years leading up to?
No, that initial violence, and this is history, me studying history, that initial violence of occupying, taking out the current regime, the power in that government system, imprisoning people. Once that was established, then the oppression started, social ideology. You're going to pay the government system this. The oppression, we started starving, So we're facing, them oppressing us as a human race. And then eventually we started facing genocide. You can read the history on it, They looked at our lives as in we're not even worth a bullet. They would take us out in rice paddies, and they would murder people by putting a plastic bag over their heads.
Damn.
Suffocating them to death, So at 3 years old, my parents, my biological father and my mother and my brother, we escaped on a wooden fishing boat with hundreds of thousands of other fleeing refugees. I want to put you in this scenario. Imagine like escaping in this country, right? Hundreds of thousands of refugees escaping on wooden boats. Well, that brought in the piracy that was going on around other countries, so neighboring countries like Thailand, Philippines, the pirates, the bandits that came in. And basically they would stop our boats when we were escaping. They'll board the boats. They'll murder the men, rape the women, and torture the children.
Were you just backing up for just a second on these boats? Who was orchestrating this kind of migration out of South Vietnam?
People, they're trying to leave. So think about like Syria or any country that's war torn. They're just trying to escape that area, right? So after the fall of South Vietnam, we are facing the communist regime. So a lot of people they were walking out of the country. They were getting on these wooden boats, smuggling themselves out. It was not like the communist regime let us leave.
Yeah.
We had to escape, And the people that own these boats, they're like fishermen, and they're just trying to make a living too.
So these are like, can you describe the boat?
A normal wooden fishing boat.
Just a motor, no motor?
Motor.
Yeah.
A motor boat. Now, this normally fits about maybe 20 people. My mother said on our boat, it was 100+ people.
Holy shit.
We couldn't sleep. We had to basically, we were in the basement area of the boat, the bottom deck of the boat, and we had to sleep sitting up, right? Because they were jam-packed in there. So think about the smell. Think about the desperate, how desperate these people were. The rich were in the same boat as the poor.
Wow.
So we are truly trying to survive and truly, trying to escape. So the piracy was going on. My mother told me the captain of the boat, he used to be ex-Navy for the South Vietnamese military. So he employed the tactics that you needed to navigate past these piracy. And basically all he did was we escaped at night. He shut off the lights. And we just kind of sailed past the piracy by cutting off the motors, right? And then once we got out at sea, then he cut on the motors, and then we went. Our first destination was Malaysia, right? So you think about it, man. Like we're escaping, and all these neighboring countries, they don't want to deal with you.
Yeah.
They don't want your issues. They don't want escaping refugees in their country where now they have to house and feed you. They're third world countries themselves. So we went into Malaysia, and the Malaysian Coast Guard stopped us at gunpoint. They shot at us. And then they told us that we will not enter their country. They anchored us in, and then they pulled us back out into the ocean. And they shot our motor, cut the lines, and left us drifting out of the oceans to die. So my mother said we drifted. We were out there for nearly a month at sea.
A month?
Nearly a month at sea. And she said people started dying, due to the lack of food and water. People were dying. And they're stealing, they're fighting from each other. They threw the dead bodies over the sea, So my mother said we were in a very desperate survival situation. She actually told me she lost hope.
Do you remember any of this?
No.
Nothing?
No. There's flashes of like the refugee camps growing up. There was a flash of like in my dreams where I see a light going through like the crevice of a boat, and I'll explain that light. But those like little flashes, I wouldn't say I remember the whole big picture. I was so young.
How about your brother?
My brother remembers.
How old was he?
He's 4 years older than me.
Okay.
So he was 7 at the time.
Wow.
So, people started dying. My mother said they were throwing people off the boat, lack of food, water. And then, my mother carried poison in her belongings. It was a common practice for fleeing refugees to poison their children when the journey ends. That means they know they're going to die. Or if the pirates enter the boat, then they'll give the poison to their children so they won't die being tortured. That they have the peaceful, death. So my mother contemplating on this poison because she knew that we're not going to make it, So she said a huge storm hit us. Imagine a fishing boat, man, out in the middle of the South China Sea, right? And she said this huge storm, she thought the boat was going to tip over.
With no motor?
No motor. And we drifted and drifted. But the rain, she said, saved us because it allowed us, the water source we needed in order to survive a few more days. She said that we drifted out, that the storm took us further out into the ocean. They didn't know where the captain didn't know where we're at. We were just out at sea, had no motor. We're just drifting. And a miracle happens, man. There was a Russian supply boat that was exiting out of out of Vietnam. They were leaving Vietnam and they saw refugees. Now, I want to paint the story. These are Russians. The government, the system, the ideology that took me out of my country, that took away my freedoms, that murdered my family, And these Russians were coming out of Vietnam and they saw fleeing refugees and they saved us. They brought us on board and they brought us on board one at a time, is what my mother said. And they basically provide medical aid to us. We were drifting out at sea for nearly a month. And they anchored us on, and then they told the captain, and my mother said it to the T, they told the captain that you're lucky because if we were going into Vietnam, we would have drug you back into Vietnam.
Oh, man.
But because we're going out of Vietnam, we have no other choice but to take you with us. Right? So their destination was Singapore. Right? So they basically tug us along, on their line, and they dropped us off at a refugee camp in Indonesia. I want to explain this, the situation to you is that these refugee camps they're very dangerous, man. They're a plot of land in the middle of the jungle.
Mm-hmm.
And there's maybe a control post in the middle, right, where people go there and check their mails, and that's their communications, sponsorships to get into other countries, So we lived on this plot of land in the middle of the jungle in a grass hut in a tropical island, no food, no water is given to you. So you have to survive off the land.
How long were you there for?
A year and a half.
So up into 4.5 or 5.5?
Yeah, 4.5.
4.5 years old.
So we were living off the land, and my brother growing up, he would tell me, I used to gather firewood around the camp, and I would see dead bodies all around the camp because people were getting murdered for supplies. Women were drugged into the woods and getting raped.
Is this, you said Indonesia, correct?
Indonesia.
Is this Indonesians?
This is refugees on refugees.
This is South Vietnamese on South Vietnamese, not taking care of each other.
It's about survival.
Yeah.
At that point. And then you have, bandits in these jungles as well. I asked my mother, I said, okay, so how do we survive? Well, my mother she's hard, right?
Yeah.
She's badass. And what she told me was, there were rich refugees. And they had these, jewelry and stuff that they would tape to them. And she will go and basically bid because they need to sell their jewelry to eat, right? So my mother would take this jewelry from him, be the middle person, make the trek through the jungle where people are murdered and raped and killed daily, go to the northern portion of the island and deal with these bandits.
Wow.
And sell them these valuables for money, and she'll track back and take her earnings, and that's what kept us alive.
Did you have to hide that from?
Oh yeah,
from pretty much everybody, right?
Yeah. I mean, I just think like a young Asian lady trekking through the jungles.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So her children can survive.
Damn. Who was watching you guys?
I don't hear too much stories on my biological father. It's just they divorced when I was very young. But I'm sure he had a helping hand on how we survived in the refugee camps as well. So, so we lived off this in this plot of land. Now, what's really unique was my aunt married a American Special Forces Green Beret, and he was an officer. His G base got overran during one of the battles, right? And he got stabbed by SKS bayonet in the back of his rib cage area, and he ended up killing the Viet Cong. He'll make sure he'll let you know I killed him too, you know. But he was evacuated out of Vietnam, you know, and my aunt went with him after the fall of South Vietnam, and she moved over to the United States, to Fayetteville, North Carolina, right? So him being an officer in the United States military, he was able to sponsor us to come over to America. Now, what I want to explain to you is my mother waited a year and a half for the sponsorship. We got accepted to New Zealand. We got accepted to Canada. We could have been, you know what I mean, we could have been in all these different, Australia, we could have been in all these different countries that accepted us as refugees. America, at that time, it took a little longer, you know, unpopular Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the sponsorship, we were able to get to America. And I asked my mother, you know, later on in life, I said, why? You know, why in America? She said, before I left, you know, your grandfather who funded the escape, made me promise that if I survive this journey, then you must do what you can to become an American, because you need to reunite with your sister in America. And that's the land of the free. So my mother waited, you know, literally for a year and a half, and then eventually we got accepted to come to America. And we made our way to Fayetteville, North Carolina, where that was the, if you know Fayetteville, North Carolina, anybody who's ever been there, it's a town right outside of the biggest military base, biggest army base in America, you know, for special operations, the home of special operations, which was Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And that was where I was raised.